One thing is for certain, and that's that the idea of imaginary friends is stigmatized. Many do not understand the full scope or function of these entities. When people think of imaginary friends and anyone other than a small child, images of someone like Drop Dead Fred come to mind. For those unfamiliar, Drop Dead Fred is a 1991 production by Polygram Film Entertainment. In the story, a girl named Elizabeth gains the titular character, played by the late Rick Mayall. He's a very obnoxious character, and he's meant to diffuse the overbearing behavior of her mother. Things go horribly wrong, however, when he appears to Elizabeth in her adult years. More or less, she seems crazy, and no one else can see Fred. This sort of idea may be entertaining on the big screen, but it creates an expectation that is unfair to those who have creative companions. The misconception isn't anything new. Early studies on the subject, though primarily on children, concluded that those with imaginary friends had them as a symptom of psychosis, rather than something they willingly created. Many companions were attributed to dissociative disorder, which is formerly known as multiple personality disorder, schizophrenia, or trauma. Newer studies have shown the opposite. While the psychosis element does still exist, companions are not exclusive to those diagnoses. Generally, companions were also not created as a symptom, but consciously, for a number of reasons, from experimentation, self-exploration, entertainment, creative thinking, and problem solving. Culture also does play a factor. Again, while this is primarily a study on children, it has been found that some countries, like Mexico for example, could attribute imaginary friends to a propensity for lying. It's important to note that despite the stigma, those with imaginary companions and are not suffering from a psychosis are not experiencing hallucinations of whom they cannot discern their reality. If anything, those without such conditions are very well aware of the imaginary status of their companions. In fact, they are the ones who are directly responsible for creating them, rather than them actually appearing like some ghost. It's only fair to say that those with psychoses are capable of having creative companions that they knowingly create and control, and therefore are not only subjects of hallucinations, provided, of course, there is a level of treatment and awareness that is present. Imaginary companions in adolescents and adults is not only generally common in one respect or another, but there is a long history of imaginary companions being created and kept by many great minds. One such example would be Socrates. In his time, the phenomenon of the imaginary friend was referred to as a person's genius and was thought to be a sort of guardian spirit, similar to a muse. Everyone was thought to have at least one of these genius spirits, and they were responsible for providing creative insight. It was believed that these entities could bestow or invoke a great deal of wisdom. Again, very much like a muse. This sort of idea resurfaced in the 1940s as researchers started to show a new sense of interest in this topic within the psychodynamic tradition. The idea of imaginary companionship was discussed as the superego, the ego, and the id concepts in psychoanalytic studies. Other notable names of infamous adults with imaginary companions include Eleanor Roosevelt, Sir Isaac Newton, Machiavelli, and the Bronte siblings. One thing that many experts would agree on is that imaginary companions serve a function. This is regardless of when they appear, be they in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood. The influence and practices utilized among these companions can serve as a healthy tool for many of the individuals with them or general majority. Rather than loneliness, these companions appear spontaneously in order for the child to play, experiment, and express in a means that is under their control with little to no consequence to the child's regular social existence. They can still have a normal amount of interactions with a normal amount of real-life friends. This can actually still be the case for adults as well. While not focusing so much on play, per se, teens and adults are also able to control and explore with these entities in a world that is quite complicated and in which they are often left to their own devices. As a teenager and an adult, the world is full of societal norms, and reputations are more considered and more important. Therefore, having a safe way to explore options and scenarios is certainly quite desirable. Skills that can be gained from these interactions include speech development, cognitive thinking, and allowing a person to understand perspective and empathy. Play and pleasure are important for combating anxiety and depression. As a child moves into adolescence and adulthood, less focus is put on the play and more on academic focus and practical tasks. This often leads to an absence of the ability to express creativity. It has been shown that adolescents create and maintain imaginary companions even to simply alleviate boredom, even with imaginary friends, whether they openly admit to having them or not. It is understood that these companions do not ultimately replace or stand in lieu of real friends or social interactions. It is theorized that the companions function in the same way that they would in children, though obviously made to fit the situations of the adolescent life. Adults are also prone to creating imaginary companions. While in many cases this would be similar to that of the adolescents, the focus topics would be those that adults would face. There are some professions in which imaginary companions are not only common, but encouraged. The most common example is that of the writer. Creating characters is expected, and often giving a lot of life via the illusion of independent agency is pretty much desired. The illusion of independent agency is defined as when a character is created by a writer but has its own autonomy outside the control of the author. There are many different types of imaginary companions that anyone of any age can have. Not only does it include a separate entity, but also an alternative version of oneself. For lack of a better term, a doppelganger. Regardless of the form, they all fall under the category of imaginary companion and serve as the like. The most commonly recognized form of the imaginary friend is the invisible friend. This type is created entirely by the individual's imagination and cannot be seen by others. The appearance of these invisible friends can vary to any degree. Some can be really scary, while others can look silly. It all depends on the imagination of the creator. It is estimated that 60% of imaginary friends are human in nature, while 40% are animal or some other creature in some other fashion. These entities can also manifest, such as passed on loved ones. Another common manifestation of imaginary companions is that of personification. This manifestation involves sentience being applied to an object, such as a stuffed animal, doll, toy, or a random object. A popular example of this form of imaginary companionship would be that of the Calvin and Hobbes comics, in which, to Calvin, a small boy, Hobbes is a real tiger companion with whom they can go on grand adventures. However, in reality, he's simply just a plush tiger. A somewhat unspoken manifestation of imaginary companionship is that of the parasocial relationship. A parasocial relationship is a fictional friendship, relationship, or closeness to anyone or anything, which ranges from celebrities to fictional characters in books, movies, or television. While this can involve a lot of real existing people, such as the president or your favorite actress, there is a general level of logic applied to these relationships to denote them as fantasy. In a world full of stimulating media, individuals can engage in closeness with their chosen companion in the imaginary sense, such as reading magazines, such as Twitter and Facebook. Jennifer Barnes, in her lecture Imaginary Friends and Real-World Consequences, Parasocial Relationships, adamantly stated, quote, "Logically, we know fictional characters do not exist and do not know us. Logically, we know celebrities have millions of fans and do not know us personally, even though sometimes it feels like they do." She goes on to explain that one's investment in these characters, or celebrities, stems from what is called a leaf. A leaf is defined as an automatic, gut-level, belief-like attitude that may contradict a specifically held belief. Her example was that of something like a glass elevator flying over the town. Logically, one would know that the elevator is safe, as there is a floor to it. However, the a leaf response would still be that there is a danger of falling, because we see the ground below. In that aspect, though one logically knows the relationship is make-believe and friendships are not real, the a leaf reaction still manages to convince the individual of that closeness. Another form of imaginary friend is the sona, or fandom sona. This falls more under the category of doppelganger, in which an individual is able to create an imaginary version of themselves in order to explore creative thought. This form of imaginary expression can easily coincide with other forms, as the sona chosen can be entirely made up or inspired by fictional sources. Some examples of this would be the fursona for those in the furry community, in which an anthropomorphic animal is somehow able to represent them. Another is the pony sona in regard to the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic fandom, in which a person envisions themselves as a sort of pony character, or an otherwise related species that is related to the show, such as griffins or dragons. One can also have what is called a monster sona in regard to the fandom for the PC game Undertale, or a gem sona in regard to the Steven Universe fandom, in which a character is a personified gem. Those are simply just a few examples of the doppelganger form of imaginary play. The final form of imaginary companion that we'll discuss is the tulpa. The literal translation for tulpa is thought form. Samuel Vissier describes them as imaginary companions who are said to have achieved full sentience after being conjured through thought form meditative practice. This was an ancient practice by Tibetan Buddhist monks in order to connect with their deities. In modern culture, tulpamancy is seen less as a spiritual cause and more as a form of creating companionship. The general statistics of tulpamancers are adolescents, or more specifically, young adult males who feel a sense of loneliness or social awkwardness. While there is no real change in the level of intelligence between tulpamancers and those with or without more traditional imaginary companions, the inadequacies are indeed in contrast. That being said, many tulpamancers still utilize their tulpas in the same manner as others use more traditional imaginary companions. Many tulpamancers have claimed to have suffered a great deal of anxiety, depression, or have a form of autism, and they feel quite adamant about the idea that their tulpas are making them better in some way, as well as making them empathic and aware of others around them. Similar to the fandom sona and parasocial relationships, the tulpa can also draw on other fictional or inspired means like celebrities, superheroes, TV shows, movies, and books. There have been accounts of people, animals, furry, and pony tulpas being thought into creation, as well as any number of other characters, original or not, from fandoms becoming the chosen form of an individual's tulpa. In conclusion, it becomes apparent that, overall, imaginary companions are quite common and healthy to not just children, but individuals of any age. This does not entirely exclude or debunk that such manifestations can appear in the mentally ill, but it certainly isn't the general rule of thumb. These companions allow individuals to explore fears, anger, identity, and general mental stimulation, aka alleviating boredom. They also provide a chance to practice cognitive and creative thinking and social roleplay. Despite the stigmas and stereotypes about imaginary interactions present due to media dramatizations and ignorance, these companions are common, functional, and considered a healthy part of development, coping, stress relief, and, to many, an integral part of the creative process. Now's the time for you to click on the annotation if you're not already in the playlist. Also, if you would like to start from the beginning, click on that annotation. It would be nice to watch these in order so you do not get lost.